Hello everyone, welcome back to Board Games with me, Ganymede. And today we are going to be playing, or attempting to play, D-Day at Peleliu, which is a game by, by John Butterfield, published by Decision Games. It is a solitaire game, as you can see, which is a good reason to play it here. The version I am playing here is a conversion that I did from physical to tabletop simulator. This is not available to the general public. I have asked Decision Games, I sent them an email to see what their thoughts were on allowing me to make it available, but I haven't heard anything back. And I don't know if I ever will. But for now, I figured it's going to be a lot easier for me to demonstrate this if I just have a digital version of it. So I just made my own. So it's not available anywhere. Nothing about this is online anywhere or accessible to anybody else. It's just all on my local machine. But I've got it set up in such a way that I think it all works. I've tried this before. Not quite in the same format. I actually had a smaller board, so this is the first time I'm trying it with a full-sized, takes up the whole table kind of board here, so that's a little bit experimental, but it should work. But it's basically got everything that I need to play here, apart from the rules and the player aids, which are kind of vital. But we've got the counters, we've got the board, we've got the card deck here, and it's all larger than it actually is to just make things a bit easier to see. But otherwise, it's basically the game that's in the box. So in here, you also get your deck of cards, a bunch of baggies, the rule book, which where's the rule book? The rule book is here, and you get a really nice little campaign booklet that sort of explains about the whole battle and who was in it. And you get the board and a bunch of player aids, which are just these things. They just basically tell you the important things about what you need to do during the game, and they have various tables and things that you need to play the game as well, so you can't actually really play without it. So I will be referring to the rules quite a bit. You can also download the rules from the Decision Games website as well. But this is a complex game, so it's got lots of little fiddly bits that I'm probably going to have to keep referring to, and it's quite likely I'll get a few things wrong, but hopefully I'll notice them in time before they do too much damage to the game. So if you don't know anything about this battle, it occurred in the Pacific. It's Pacific Theatre. It's actually one of the islands in what is now Palau, and it occurred on it started on the 15th of September 1944, where the US Marines invaded the island, occupied by the Japanese. The Japanese had built an airstrip or an airfield here, and the Americans felt that the Japanese could use this to kind of flank them as they were heading into Japan. So they decided to try to neutralize this by invading the island and occupying it. As it turned out, in the end, or in hindsight at least, it wasn't actually that essential. The Japanese, I think the Japanese weren't even going to use this. They didn't even plan to use this to kind of flank the Americans or anything. But ultimately, the Americans threw a lot of people at this island. The Japanese defended it with a lot of people as well. And it turned into this gigantic meat grinder. They thought that they would be able to take the island in about 4 days after softening it up with barrages and so on from offshore. But it actually took them, I think, about 83 days to fully secure the island. And it was horrific. They sent the 1st Marines Division in, and they pretty much decimated, but they were decimated by the time they finished. They're very high casualty rate. They did pretty much wipe out all the Japanese. I think they had a literal handful of prisoners, but they really took a beating, and a large part of that was, well, there's this great big open space in the middle that was, fire was crossing that quite heavily. There's not an awful lot of cover out here on an airfield. And B, this area up here is the Umubrogal Mountain, which is a big mountain or set of ridges that's on the island, and the Japanese were holed up in here really tightly. They had lots of fortifications, lots of caves to hide in, and it was really difficult to root them out of there. So they spent quite a bit of effort trying to get onto the island in the first place, and then a heck of a lot of effort trying to clear the Japanese out of here. And it was just a really, really impossible terrain. Like, the terrain was bad, the weather was bad, there was mud everywhere, mud and death, basically. It was horrific. And the reason we know a fair bit about this battle, actually, is twofold. One is this book by Eugene Sledge, who was a Marine that was there at the battle. He was there for Peleliu, and he was there for the invasion of Okinawa afterwards. And he wrote this book afterwards. He survived the battle, obviously. Miraculously, he survived without any significant wounds, if any at all. But he was he was in the mortar section, basically. He was a private in the mortar section of one of the companies. And he wrote about his experiences after the war, and wrote this book called With the Old Breed. And eventually it was made into a TV series, which you may have heard of, called The Pacific. This is by the same people that did Band of Brothers, Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg. This is the same kind of deal as Band of Brothers. It's a very realistic depiction of the war, but where Band of Brothers focused on the European theatre, and also focused on the unit itself, the camaraderie between everyone in there, what they saw, where they were, etc. The Pacific is more about how the war affected people, and this is also obviously in the Pacific theatre. And a good chunk of this, about 3 or 4 episodes of this, is actually from this book. Pretty much verbatim. There's a few bits that have changed. Like, you can definitely see that, this scene is from the book, but they've changed characters a bit, or over dramatized it, or kind of changed the focus of it. But it's a very brutal representation, and it was obviously realistic as well, representation of the invasion of Peleliu, among other things. They've got a bit of Guadalcanal in there, and Okinawa, but the Peleliu and Okinawa sections are essentially from this book. And it shows you, or gives you an idea at least, of how bad it was, and the book goes into a lot more kind of graphic description of how Sledge felt, and how it made him feel at the time. but it was basically just grueling. Just really wore people down, you know, because there was so much, like I said, there was so much mud, there was so much death, there was bullets flying everywhere, people blowing up, everything blowing up, digging holes where, you know, and digging into dead bodies and all sorts of other horrible things. So this game is obviously not a cakewalk. This is a very, very challenging board game version of that. I kind of hesitate to call these things games sometimes because it kind of trivializes it almost. But this is another representation of the conflict, and it is very, very challenging. The victory conditions in this are so extreme that I'm not even sure anyone has ever actually won it. You know, there's people that have come close, but it's a very, very tough game. And the reason why is that they set I think the victory conditions were set based on what the Americans initially thought that they'd be doing. You know, like I said, they thought they were gonna take the island in 4 days. But obviously that didn't happen. It took them, you know, 2 months or so at least. And you know, it kind of shows you how hard that was by just setting the victory bar so high. So we'll see how far we can get in it. But just to give you a brief kind of tour of the island here, we have down here at the bottom, this is actually the west side of the island. We have the landing beaches where the Americans will be coming on, and here's a few that are lined up already. These are all companies, basically, of the 1st Marine Division. And K35 here, this is where Sledge was. This is Eugene Sledge's company. So they're all coming in on boats that are not sort of represented here, but they're those little armoured landing craft. There's a couple of there's some amphibious tanks that have already made it onto the beach here. These little white squares are Japanese units, so we know there's Japanese in these spots, but we don't know what they are at the moment. There's some of them have been disrupted already. They start off in a disrupted state, but that will change soon. Some of them as well have, most of them have just the one counter here. Some of them have got this depth counter underneath as well, which is something that kind of just makes them harder to deal with. And that will be a recurring thorn in our sides because these units will be reinforced and get second winds and so on, and we'll find that they are harder to deal with than we originally thought. So the aim, like the goal of this, is essentially to do 2 of 3 things. Well, maybe 3 of 3 things. One of the things is not die. So over here we have this infantry losses box, the catastrophic loss box. And every time we lose a counter of one of our companies, it will end up in here. And there is a limit to this depending on what turn of the game you're in. And if you hit that limit, you immediately lose. It's just you've lost too many people. The invasion is called off. We've been repelled, and it's a failure basically. So one thing we want to do is not die in huge numbers, which is definitely easier said than done. If we can manage that, there's 2 things. There's 3 other things that we could do to win, but we only need 2 of them. So one of them is to take out these 2 hexes over here, A5 and the A6 over here, and these are coral terrain. I think this is referred to as the point. And these guys were laying down fire on the landing beaches like no tomorrow, and were a real pain in the arse, and they had to, you know, work their way up there and try and kill them before they wiped everyone out. So this is a challenge. And it doesn't seem too hard. You know, how hard can taking out 2 units be? But you've got to remember that we are all coming in from here, and we've got to work our way around this to get to them. The other things that the other victory conditions are that we have 2, and let me just double check this. We have 2. Secure 10 of these position hexes, these coloured hexes that project fire onto the beaches. So there's, I think there's 13 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 of these coloured hexes. These are position hexes. They are all projecting fire onto the beaches, which is what these coloured dots are. And if we can secure all of these, i.e. basically occupy them and make sure the Japanese aren't in them anymore, if we can secure 10 of them, sorry, not all of them, if we can secure 10 of them, then that's a victory condition in the bag. The other one is to secure 14 positions in Zone B. So you'll see that some of these hexes here have got letters and numbers and things in them. Everything that has B in them, which is essentially all of this area, this like airfield and bits to the north and the south of it maybe. This whole region here is Zone B. Over here is Zone A. All these are A hexes, you'll see, A3 here. Up here is Zone C. And then I think over on this side is Zone D, which we don't need to worry about. These are way later on. But we're only interested in Zone B for victory conditions. So we have to take 14 of those hexes. So a lot of these up to here, at least, up to this one is Zone B. But then there's, I think that's not one. So it's basically this one is B18, B16, that's C3, that's C2. So I think it's just this lot. And this is a B. Oh, and this is a B as well up here. So it's this chunk that's sort of around the mountain is all Zone B. So if we can get 14 of them, and 10 of those can be in the landing area, or up to 10 of them can be in the landing area, then we've won as well. So we've got to get 10 of these beach hexes, we've got to get 14 of these B zone hexes, or we've got to get these 2 hexes over here. Which doesn't sound too bad, but believe me, it is. That is why this game is so challenging. I've actually come up with some alternate victory levels, at least, so that you can, you know, play the game without feeling that essentially you're fighting a losing fight. But you know, it doesn't change the difficulty. It just sort of changes the levels a little bit. But I'll get into that later on. So for now, our immediate concern is invade the island, get on there, and start moving in. And that is going to be very difficult because the Japanese are going to be firing at us. And that's what these dots are. So each of these positions has a color, like yellow. I call this yellow. I think it might be referred to as orange in the rules, but to me that looks like yellow. So yellow, brown, purple, blue, red, green. I think that's basically all of them. But they're different colors throughout the whole map, or different combinations of those colors throughout the whole map, and they all have dots around them. And that basically tells you, like, so in this hex, for example, this red hex can project fire into all of the hexes that have that red dot in them. And if it's a solid hex, a solid color, then it's intense fire. If it's one of these checkered, I guess you call it, spots, then it's called steady fire, and it's not as severe, and it's easier to survive that if you're just in one of these checkered steady fire boxes. And the way this is all determined, whether this hits anyone, is that you have these cards up here, which you draw to basically determine what happens every turn. And you'll see that all the cards have got the same kind of format. They've got a landing thing at the top, they've got an event part in the middle, and they've got this band at the bottom that has colours and symbols in it. And this band is what tells you who is hit. So in this case, yellow, purple and green hexes would be active, essentially. So anyone who is in the field of fire of a green hex would be checking to see if they're hit. Anyone who's in the field of fire of a yellow one would be checking. Anyone who's in the field of fire of a purple would be checking as well. And the various symbols in here also add to that, but we'll get to that when we get to it later on. So essentially, if we have, say, this guy here, let's say he's here. If one of these was red, well, actually, let's make it easier. We'll put him over here. So there's yellow. Yellow is active, so he would be hit. And you have a look at the chart in the player aid, and that says that if you are in this intense fire box, and you are, well, if you're basically just in it, then you are going to be hit no matter what. If you are in one of the steady fire boxes, one of these ones where it's checkered colour, then you're only going to be hit if the symbol on the card, which is this triangle in this case, matches the symbol on the counter. And you see that some of the counters have got different symbols. There's a circle, there's a diamond, and there's triangles. And there's also stars, which are for HQs. So in this case, if this guy was over here, he would actually still be hit, because even though he's in a checkered yellow spot in a steady fire zone, he's got a triangle symbol, and this triangle symbol is on the card as well. If this symbol was a diamond, he wouldn't be hit, because it will only hit the ones that match that symbol on the card. But if you're in a steady fire zone, then it doesn't matter what the symbol is, you're going to get hit. So that basically is how that works. But we'll get to that more. I'll show you how that all works when we get to the first turn. So just to show you around the board a little bit before we get started, we've got the map, obviously, I've just been through. Got the counters. Up here is the cards. So we've got a deck of cards here that is going to be determining how this game works and what we're doing. And like I said, we've got different areas on these cards that are useful in different parts of the game. There are 7 phases to each turn, and we just basically go through them one by one and resolve everything as it happens. So the first phase is the amphibious operation. So that is when we are getting our guys onto the beach and setting up the next round, or setting up for the next turn. So that is determined by a card, which will get put here. And for this part, we just look at the landing part at the top. And you'll see there's a landing, there's a coloured symbol, and there is a statement about the drift. And I'll explain all that as we go through it, but I'm just going through the sequence here. For now, once we've done that, we ordinarily would go to the first event phase, which is phase 2, but we don't do that in the first turn. There's no events. But in subsequent turns, we draw another card, and I'm just going to use the same one for the moment here. We draw another card, and then whatever the event is here in the middle is what would happen. So in this case, if we'd drawn this card for the event, in turns 2 to 23 we get Semper Fi, conduct 1 extra US action this turn, which is quite handy. And then these different things are for different parts of the game to use when they, where appropriate. Once we've resolved that, we draw a card for the Japanese fire phase. So this is where the colours come in again. So we'll draw another card. It will have different colours and symbols on it, and then we'll use those colours and symbols to determine who's going to get hit. So if we get blue, green and red, then we'll check all the blue spaces, we'll check all the green spaces, we'll check all the red spaces, and we'll damage our counters accordingly. So each of these counters has a step on it, a step value. And that's denoted by these dots on the side. So all of the infantry units here start off with 4 steps. As they get wounded, they will get flipped over and they'll be reduced in step number. So in this case, E21 here is dropped down to 3. You'll also see that its numbers on it have changed as well. So this means it's got a strength of 7 and a range of 2. But when we flip it over, it's now got a strength of 5, and you'll see now that it's got these symbols on the side, which are the weapons that it has that are still active. So in this case, it's gone from having all the weapons it would normally have, so basically any weapons that it needs it's got, down to it's just got Brownings, bazookas and demolitions is what that is. BR, BZ and DE. And that's important because each of these Japanese units requires certain weapons to be able to kill it, or damage it even, or disrupt it. And if the unit doesn't have those weapons, then it's going to be a lot less effective against that Japanese unit. So, we start off fully armed, but as we get more damage, we lose certain capabilities in terms of our weapons. So this counter goes down to 3. When we get wounded even further, we'll have to dig into the bag here, and we will get out E21 here, which is the 2-step version of that counter. So this counter will then tootle off over to the catastrophic loss box and count as a catastrophic loss, and if we get too many of them, then we've lost the game. So now E21, sorry, I keep calling him E21, F21 and so on, but it's really E21. E21 is now a 2-step unit. It's reduced, and you'll see now that it's got 3 strength, a bazooka and Browning, and it's lost its demolitions. And if it gets wounded again, it flips over to the other side of that, which is a 1-step unit, and now it's only got a strength of 2, it's got a bazooka, and that's it. And once this takes another hit, then it is gone, and off it goes to the great catastrophic loss box in the sky. And you'll notice that every counter in here counts against this loss limit. And because each unit has 2 counters, so if a unit is entirely wiped out, it counts as 2 for this loss value. So that's not a good thing. So we'll put you back in here, and we'll resurrect E21 here and bring it out here. So that's basically how the combat works anyway. You're going to be losing steps, and you don't want to lose too many of them because you'll lose the game if you lose too many. There are other things in here that we'll get to when we do this phase, but the main point is that these colours tell you what's getting hit. The letters and symbols inside those colours are special things that will happen later on in the game at the same time. This symbol, where it'll be like a triangle, circle, diamond, will tell you who is going to get hit if they're in a steady fire zone or in certain other situations. So once we've gone through the whole thing and resolved that, we then theoretically go on to the second event phase, but we don't have that in the first 4 turns. So that's the same as the first, just another event happens after the fire. Then there's a headquarters phase, which again is skipped for the first 7 turns, so we don't need to worry about that until we get to there. But then we get to the action phase for the US, which is where we do stuff, finally. So it's interesting at first because we only get 2 actions for the whole thing. Everybody that is on the map has a total of 2 actions between all of them. So basically we're going to be doing something with 2 units, and that's it at the beginning. Later on, headquarters units will be showing up, and they will be able to order people around for free, so we'll get more actions then. I'll correct myself here and say that actually we do have free actions to do as well, because when you get onto the beach you generally have a free preservation move that you can do, which is just to get off the beach and you just move 1 hex out of there. But then you start hitting stacking limits and things like that, and it gets interesting. But again, we'll go over that in more detail later on. But in this case, we don't have cards because we don't need cards for this part, because it's just going to be moving and attacking and so on. But there are cases where cards are going to come into it, which is barrage checks, infiltration checks, and close combat, and they would go here. And then once we got through that, then we head off to the end of turn. We discard all the cards that we've piled up on here, and we check for a shuffle, because if the discarded cards are more, if there's more discarded cards than there are in the actual deck that is remaining, you reshuffle everything. So you don't wait to use every single card. You just, you reshuffle when the discards are more than the remaining deck, which is interesting. And then you just start the next turn and go through this again. And as the turns advance, you'll start to see, right, now we can do a first event, and then we can do a second event, and then the HQs come out, and so on. So here we've got the turn track, and you can see there's a few interesting things on here. First, the turn just goes across, so it's turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, etc. You'll see they correspond to times as well. So turn 1 is 8:30 when the invasion begins. Turn 2 is 9 o'clock, half an hour later. Turn 3 is 09:30, and so on. And then it goes like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and so on. Until we get to turn 12, which is 1800 hours. And that is the end of the day. And that's the end of the first scenario, essentially. So we're trying to get to this point. And then there is a single night turn, which is special. Different things happen. And then we start the next day, the 16th, and we have to get through to turn 24 to end the whole thing. So we're only covering the first 2 days of the invasion here, not like the whole thing. But there is an alternate scenario called Bloody Nose Ridge, which is what they called Umilbrogel Mountain here, and that is only this part of the island, so we ignore everything else. This is set like in October, a month or so later, where the US are trying to crack through this mountain and get rid of the Japanese. They're all holed up and fortified on here, but I haven't looked at that. you know, obviously it's described in the book and shown in the TV show, and this is like really bad part of the battle. But I'm assuming that in the game it's very difficult. But I haven't tried it yet. I haven't even really read how it works. But similar ideas, just different things happening. So when we get to turn 12, well, if we get to turn 12, if our catastrophic loss box fills up to whatever the limit is for that turn, so you see at the bottom here it says CL 10, 12, 14, 16, etc. Basically double the turn number. If it gets to that number in that turn, then that's it, game over, we're done. So you can't catastrophically lose in the first 4 turns, but if in turn 5, if we've got 10 counters on here that are infantry, then that's it, game over. So we get a bit more leeway as we go up. So there's, you know, if you can survive at 21 units in the box at turn 11 and make it to turn 12, then suddenly you've got a couple more units that you can have as breathing space there. But if we survive, if we get through that at turn 12, that's where we check our victory conditions that I described earlier on, and we'll see how badly we did. Because yeah, it's gonna be bad. But we have to get to that point first. I managed to, in my initial playthrough of this, I actually managed to finish the whole day, which was pretty spectacular, but I am pretty certain that I did make some rules mistakes that kind of prolonged my life a bit there. So I'm not sure if that really counts. You know, it's definitely a learning game, but it was very, very close. It was extremely close. I thought I'd actually died or hit the limit on the 12th turn, but then I remembered that certain units don't actually go into this, like HQs and tanks and things don't actually go into that box, so I had a bit more room than I previously thought. But anyway, this is going to be the end of the scenario probably. If by some miracle we get to this point and we haven't died, and we may not have won the 1 day scenario, but we might have got enough to keep going for the full 24 turn scenario. It's very unlikely. You have to take at least secure at least 10 of these beach firing hexes to do that. But if we do, then we have an opportunity to carry on, but we'll see how that goes. All these American units on each turn here are actually going to be coming in from here at the start of each turn. So start of turn 2 we don't get anyone else coming in, but at the start of turn 3, well sorry, at the start of turn 2, let me take that back, we have these guys coming in. So actually turn 2 these guys are going to be coming in. Turn 1 these guys are already here. So we don't actually have to roll, we don't have to actually do an amphibious landing in the first turn here. So turn 2 that lot are going to be coming in, and then in turn 3 this big pile are going to come in, turn 4 this pile's coming in, and so on, and then there's gaps and more people coming in. Mostly it trails off. There's a couple of people coming in the afternoon, but that's it until the next day, and then there's a few more coming in the morning, and that's it. So what else is there? Some places here for putting the other Japanese units that we have not seen yet, which are all in this bag. The Japanese depth markers, which are those second counters that are underneath the other counters. They basically add more difficulty to the Japanese units. Eliminated units go up here for the Japanese, and some of them will come back during the night. They get reorganized essentially. There's artillery on here in some places. That's what this rectangle with a dot is. We can destroy that, and we will put these counters on there to destroy them. And that's pretty much it. There's the command post range, which we'll get to when we get to it. Over here is a terrain chart, which we must remember. I had trouble remembering some of this stuff, but the terrain has effects on the units that are in it, or at least the Japanese units that are in it. Sometimes they'll prevent movement, and other times they will, and also they may double the strength of the Japanese counters in there because it's just tougher to attack them. That's basically the board and the quick sort of going over of the sequence of events. So I'll leave it there for now, and we'll get stuck in properly in the next video. So we'll see you then. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ta-da!